you have to know what you're doing with the technology that you have. My Cambodia experience showed me there's so many times technology gets dropped in a classroom, someone checks the box that a solution has arrived, and they leave. And it never gets used. There's no confidence to use this in front of a classroom of children or learning adults. And you say to yourself, what was it all for? So I think that holistic approach is truly what allows the power of partnership, but it also allows companies to think about what's your unique value in being able to help be a part of the solution.
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Augmented AI. I'm excited that you're tuning in to the Shift AI podcast, a show that explores what it takes to thrive and adapt to the changing workplace in the digital age of remote work and AI. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Michele Malejki as our guest. Michele is currently the Global Head of Social Impact for HP and Director of the HP Foundation, where she accelerates digital equity through business as well as philanthropy. In 2023, Michele and her team received the prestigious inaugural Time Team of the Year award. If you're someone interested in digital equity, corporate social responsibility, and the intersection of business and philanthropy, you are not going to want to miss this episode. We also want to send out a special thank you to Augmented AI for sponsoring this episode. This is going to be a great show, and we're super excited to talk to Michele today. We can't wait to learn more from her. Let's get to it. All right, Michele, thank you for being on the Shift AI podcast. I really appreciate you being on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, like all shows, I'm going to start by reading back your resume, which is pretty impressive and really, really interesting. And then we can kind of get into the show. But I want to start, I know that way back, you were a banker. And right after that, after living in New York for a little while, you decided to go overseas into some countries and help those folks on the ground. And I want to go into that in detail. You went to Malaysia and Thailand and Cambodia?
Yeah, Cambodia.
As well,
Mm-hmm.
And Cambodia. So that's kind of an interesting part of your life that I think I want to explore, but related to the banking. And then you became part of the Clinton Foundation as well and did some work there, which is interesting. And then from there, the HP to HP and the HP Foundation, where you're at right now, and working on all sorts of issues related to equity and sustainability and technology. And so today, did I get most of that?
I think you did, absolutely.
I know there's a few things in there, I'm sure that I missed, but good. I'm glad I did. So will you tell the audience a little bit about where you grew up and what your family was like? And of course, as I always ask, I want to ask you about your first job where you actually got paid. So can you talk about your background a little bit?
Of course, happy to. So I am a true native New Yorker. I was born in Staten Island, which is also where my parents are from. I had the opportunity as well, though, thanks to my parents moving when I was quite young, to also grow up down the Jersey Shore in the area of Red Bank, New Jersey, for those familiar with it. And for me, it was one of those things where I had this whole experience of having family that loved being New Yorkers, had a strong work ethic. And from a very young age, I would have to tell you, my first job was just being a babysitter for kids in the community. And that was kind of what I did until I decided, great, I'm going to go and be a hostess at a restaurant, and then became a waitress, right? The whole gamut in high school. My first real job beyond kind of my high school years, I would say, or more formatively, is I had the opportunity to be an intern in New York City for a publishing company and a company that was called Institutional Investor, and was able to actually go in and learn about writing and thinking about finance and solutions at a very young age. The learning curve was steep, but it was definitely a nice experience for a young intern.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, babysitting is a great first job for so many. I think in the service jobs also, there's a lot of people on the show that their first job was some sort of service job, which I think is great training as well. What kind of job were your parents involved in?
Yeah, so my mom actually, to this day, she is a receptionist at a front desk for a hotel in the local area. She's done that over 30 years. I love it because she honestly is just someone who has the most amazing people skills I've ever seen. And I tell her all the time, especially in the summer months in a Jersey Shore town, hotels are a fascinating place to be. And I think she does it all with grace. And my dad was a driver for an airport limo company. So they see me doing something very different today from what their lived reality really is. But I think it's something that's exciting and certainly gives us good stuff to talk about around the dinner table.
Yeah, I bet. That's so interesting. So you eventually went to New York and you were at JP Morgan when you were first in the financial sector, right?
Yes.
And so when you decided to go overseas and leave that New York lifestyle, what did your parents think?
A mix of fear as well as will she come back? And I think part of it was just, they saw me, they were very proud to see where I was working at JP Morgan, of course. And I think that was something they had always hoped would be, a road for me to go down. I think I threw them a curveball for sure. But I also think they saw the years that I was working at JP Morgan were the times of, 2006 to 9 and the whole crisis that was going on. I was in the credit risk industry in particular. So it was tough times. And I basically said, I need to figure something else out, even if it's just temporary. And so I told them
Yeah.
it's only 1 year and I'll be back. And then, of course, that was a lie. It was almost 7 years. But the reality is at that time, I said, just give me a year. Let me go figure some stuff out.
Amazing. Well, I know that that shaped you and has a lot to do with why, you're doing what you do at HP today. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you did overseas in these countries and then how that changed over time? And, obviously you stayed for much longer than you thought, so it must have been impactful. So can you talk a little bit about that time?
Yeah, I'm happy to. It was one of those experiences for me where I think I went there with certain ideals and a vision of what it was going to be, right? And I use the word very honestly. I was going to help, right? I was going to go over there. I was going to help people. That was the mentality. And as I got there, and especially in Cambodia, which was my first home overseas, I started working with smallholder farmers and realized I have no idea right now what I'm in for, how I can even help. And it was a step back for me at a very young age to also be quite humbled. And I'm honest about that and say, listen, if I'm going to help anyone, I need to understand, first of all, what do folks even need? What are they asking for? And I had the privilege of being able to work for an amazing nonprofit called One Acre Fund and try and open up their first non-Africa based nonprofit that supported farmers directly in the fields and really think about what's the next chapter for them. And so I will say what that taught me was the power of localized solutions, even if they're coming from, opportunities or folks that are coming from other parts of the world. It taught me the power of working with folks, learning local languages, truly immersing yourself. I lived in a very rural hut. I was absolutely without electricity for many parts of my time overseas, and it was a really great experience. What I took back though was the biggest lesson I learned over there, which was that unfortunately I did have to stop the operations in the country that I was in because we did not have, frankly, the policy set up to continue operations. And that was the hardest thing I've had to do. It was 3+ years of work, but it just wasn't the right fit. And like any nonprofit, I think you want to try and be as sustainable as you can. And it just wasn't the right fit. So all of the learnings went on to another location. I decided to come back to the US after a few years, but it also let me say, I now want to work on the other side of this and see what happens with the policy world. And that started me down the path where I went then to Thailand and Malaysia with an organization called the Alliance for Financial Inclusion that was funded by the Gates Foundation as well as the German government. And it had me working with the heads of central bankers from developing and emerging economies and really thinking about what's needed for policy success in some of these countries. And it was almost like the left hand then talking to the right hand for me in terms of why did Cambodia fail? What was the policy framework needed? And how would we restructure this differently? So that's kind of all the learnings that I've then taken back to where I am today. And I think it was just made me richer for it.
So when you think back during that time, what was the big policy takeaway? And and when you compared that to Cambodia, what was the big disconnect that was happening?
I think the disconnect, to be very honest with you, was just around how to deal with situations where your organization can be open to potential corruption, being asked for funding that wasn't going to support the projects itself, right? And where I really prided the organization was we always took a step back and made sure are investments going as far as they can and should be, or do we need to shift? And so just quite frankly, that was the most unfortunate part of it. And I think that's not unique to Cambodia in any way, shape, or form.
Did you come away from that Malaysia experience with some policy ideas that you think about today as you kind of work on the HP Foundation and HP?
Yeah, I think what that experience taught me was the power of actually having the individuals who are being impacted at the table and at the highest
Yeah.
levels as well. And so for me, what was exciting was to join all of these meetings and to actually see the people from the countries where their solutions were being talked about quite literally driving the answer forward, or at least having a very strong part of the decision-making process. And it's absolutely now what we try and do within the team that I'm on at HP is make sure there are no siloed solutions, as we say, coming out of this. And we're truly thinking
Yeah.
about what are we even trying to address? Do we have it in our head right? Or do we have to step back and talk to those being impacted?
Well, I really want to dive into the HP stuff, but before we do that, can you just talk a little bit about the Clinton Foundation time? I know it was a short amount of time, but very interesting. So can you kind of, well, then we'll segue into the HP discussion.
Of course. So I was actually working at the Clinton Global Initiative, which at the time had its annual flagship event. It was a number of different companies, government leaders, nonprofit organizations that come in, all to think about what is their call to action and commitment to action going to be. So it was meant to be a convening where you don't just get to show up, network, be on a panel, and go home. Your engagement is truly you coming and saying, I'm going to do X. And so my role there was to be the deputy director of program and to think about how do we bring folks together, not just for that on-stage moment, but quite frankly, what is the commitment going to be? And where can we actually link up partners and have them who all have these same missions, right? Just put them together and say, what happens when the sparks fly, when you're all sitting at the same table, and then following through on that. And so I was only there for a year and a half. Unfortunately, CGI has come back for those who are in New York and have attended the event just last year, which was great. But the reality is it was a shorter time than I would have liked. But I was very glad that HP at the time was a member and was looking for someone with the background that I had to come and try and drive this work for HP.
Before we go further with the interview, I want to take a moment to tell you about one of our podcast sponsors, Augmented AI, and how they are transforming businesses with Gen AI solutions. Augmented AI specializes in helping organizations uncover and address internal workflow challenges that Gen AI can solve. Their comprehensive process starts by identifying and prioritizing business problems, and then assessing each based on value, effort, and risk. Once a problem is selected, the Augmented AI team tests and validates the solution to ensure that it works. Only after this thorough validation do they draft technical requirements, which serve as a blueprint for building and deploying the solutions. The real beauty of partnering with Augmented AI is that they don't just stop at strategy and feasibility studies. They actually stand up the solutions and manage them for you so you can focus on what you do best. If you're interested in experiencing this innovative approach to deploying Gen AI solutions, visit simplyaugmented.ai and click on the Learn More button. That's simplyaugmented.ai. Now back to the episode. Well, that's a perfect segue into HP. So talk to the audience a little bit about, the work that you're doing now. You wear a couple different hats. And so, describe the HP work that is being done and then the foundation. And thank you for correcting me on the Clinton Global Initiative, not the Clinton Foundation, but thank you.
No worries. It's all one and the same, just different outfits. So what I do for HP is definitely, I would say, a dual hat role. I have the privilege of leading social impact for the company. And really what we focus on is digital equity. That is our commitment. That is our work stream for the space. But I get to do it in two ways. So the first is through the business side. I think about where, from an HP Inc. perspective, our solutions, our products all have a role to play in bridging a digital divide. And what is the opportunity to be intentional about that and to really step back and say, are we designing and innovating our products with these kinds of local needs in mind? How do we truly be a global company and operate in a way that a digital divide, which is so nuanced, is reflected in what we do as a business? But then on the other hat that I have, I also get to do this from a purely philanthropic point of view. And by that, I mean the HP Foundation. So there is an opportunity for me to think about what is needed beyond just our solutions and products to close a digital divide. And having been in that nonprofit space, I can tell you there is a tremendous power in having a capacity building cash grant. A lot of times people, don't always realize there are staff that need to be paid at these nonprofits. There are program ideas that need to be trialed, and we have to have the ability to invest in that solution to really see it come together. And why I like having the two hats, just to close, is because I think it allows me to have one strategy, right? And that's our North Star. We want to accelerate digital equity for 150 million people by 2030. That is the North Star. And I get to think about how we can achieve that as one company through both the investments our foundation make, as well as what we do from a business side, oftentimes supporting the same groups and the same people, but in different ways.
Yeah, given the work that you do in the foundation, both sides have a tremendous amount of impact. So let's dive deeper into that. Digital equity is such a big topic. And, in terms of what we talk about a lot on the show around AI, there's a ton of ways that we can discuss digital equity around folks of different persuasions and colors and race and women and men. I mean, it's such a broad topic. So when you start to break it down, can you kind of talk about some of the bigger issues related to digital equity from HP's perspective?
Of course. I mean, it's so clear we live in an increasingly digitized world, right? And so there's no getting away from this. But to your point, we can absolutely also be intentional about the fact that we don't widen the gap in terms of people that have access and don't. And I think just to even step back, the pandemic showed us that the digital divide can be real for pretty much anyone at any time. However, for some, it's a temporary problem. And that's what the pandemic showed. And one of the things that we took away from this whole experience a few years ago was the fact that even before the pandemic, there were 260 million kids that weren't going to school or getting an education. And so, how can we, at the same time we're thinking about closing the divide for people on a temporary basis with school issues, what are the solutions that are longer term that help to break down some of the systemic issues that folks have from addressing or being part of a more digitally inclusive society? And I think the other thing to really acknowledge about this whole holistic nature of it is that it's so much more than just a problem about poverty, right? Oftentimes people hear digital divide and they think, oh, it's because someone is poor. And that's not the case. You think about people with disabilities as a huge opportunity because they have spending power. They want to be more connected, but they can't necessarily interface because the product might not have accessibility features. And so that's an opportunity for HP and frankly, for all the different companies that are thinking about this on how to redesign by intent and make a more digitally inclusive society. And I think for us, that was part of why we stepped back a few years ago at the time that we set this big 150 million goal and said, let's make a theory of change. Let's walk through this whole equation and actually define who are the groups we want to go after that historically face this divide, to my point, and don't just have a temporary blip. And you've named some. It's women and girls. It's people with disabilities and aging populations increasingly in many parts of the world. We're thinking about educators, just by and large, what's happened to the teaching profession globally, from both a shortage as well as a retention issue, right? All of this is where we have an opportunity to be laser focused. And I think to my first points, we have to also then step back and say, what does a digital divide need to be closed? And it's not just a PC, right? It'd be easy for me to say that I'm at HP. Of course, a PC is the answer, but there's a reality that there's also connectivity gaps. We have to think about what people actually need from the PC. What type of content do they want, be it learning or otherwise? How do we help accelerate that? And then, of course, the last piece, which I like to just say is the digital literacy element. You have to know what you're doing with the technology that you have. My Cambodia experience showed me there's so many times technology gets dropped in a classroom, someone checks the box that a solution has arrived, and they leave. And it never gets used. There's no confidence to use this in front of a classroom of children or learning adults. And you say to yourself, what was it all for? So I think that holistic approach is truly what allows the power of partnership, but it also allows companies to think about what's your unique value in being able to help be a part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess layering the AI on top of that and all the discussions that we've been having about AI and the fear that people have about the computer automating their jobs away, it goes beyond that too. The fear of robots and computers taking over, and the fear tactics that you see in the media. And so there's an education piece to that too. I kind of share an optimistic view that if people have the right tools and they understand how to use those tools, they're going to be much more protected from these issues of automation taking away their livelihood. So how do you think about that, and how does that come up for you in the work that you do?
Yeah. Well, first, I love that you have that optimistic take on it as well. And I share that with you because I think, frankly, it's the reality of today, right? And even just a few years ago, I feel like you could have replaced the word AI in this conversation with the words fourth industrial revolution, right? Everyone said the same thing. The fourth industrial revolution is going to take away jobs. It's going to cause this massive decline in many opportunities. And that necessarily hasn't come to bear. In fact, there's been a lot of intentional ways to make a silver lining out of some of these things for a large population. And so I think with AI, it's to your point. How do we do an opportunity here, take it with intent? What's the intentionality that we can have? And I was excited. I mean, just a few weeks ago when HP launched its Sustainable Impact Report, We also had commissioned some work with Oxford Economics, and the study showed that 3 out of 4 business leaders today really think that tech is the key to expanding not only economic opportunity, but that AI is actually going to help them drive progress towards sustainability issues and social impact. And so I'm excited as well to see that optimistic spirit coming through from so many business leaders today, because that's what's going to help the intentionality come out of all this, right? And to make sure it's not just a marginalized thing that only a few have access to.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think about the energy implications related to AI? And there's a ton of issues about the compute and how hard it is to get access to compute, and then even when you do get access to compute, how energy intensive it is compared with other kinds of computing, search, and otherwise. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, AI is going to have a ton of different impacts, right? Some positive, and also some that will be more of a cautionary matter. And so I think as AI just matures, leads to new applications, it is going to have huge implications across this. At HP, we're aiming to utilize AI to redefine and really enhance our customer experience, but also thinking about what does that mean when it comes to trust. And so this will certainly open new possibilities, but it's going to also change the way that I think people will work. And there could be efficiencies that come from this, right? Even from how people search and learn. And as these algorithms get smarter, one would hope then that the energy consumption behind all of that also has opportunities to be positively impacted as the tools just get smarter and smarter.
And now, before we dive deeper, I want to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about one of our podcast partners. As a listener of this show, I know you're trying to stay on top of all things AI and tech, which is why you have to check out the amazing GeekWire podcast, produced by GeekWire and hosted by Todd Bishop. It's a treasure of insights featuring industry leaders and the latest tech trends that are shaping our world, and the perfect companion podcast to shift AI. GeekWire podcast is where technology meets curiosity and covers the world of technology, startups, and geek culture. Expand your tech horizons and join the conversation. Tune into the GeekWire podcast today, a perfect complement to our own discussions here. Don't miss out. Follow the GeekWire podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite listening app. Now back to the episode. I want to circle back to a question around women in tech and women in AI. I know that you are on the Council of Cornell Women, and you went to Cornell, right? And so maybe explain to the audience what the Council of Cornell Women is and what you do. And then also, I want to dig deeper into the way that not only there's a digital divide with women in technology, but also women leaders in the AI space, women leaders in the technology space. And I'm sure you deal with this all the time. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Happy to. So yeah, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to join what's called the President's Council of Cornell Women. And what this is it's a group of women who've been working for a number of years, have all become industry leaders in one way or another. And it's essentially a forum to not just have an alumni community, but one that's really rooted in what are you doing in your post-Cornell life professionally. So what I love about this is there are other women that are sustainability leaders like myself. There are a lot of women who are in finance or legal positions, hospitality industry, just it runs the gamut truly, as well as a number of nonprofit leaders, which I've been able to have wonderful explorations with going forward. One, in fact, who I work with now through my current role. And so what I think this has been helpful for is it's been a safe space. It's an opportunity to give back. But frankly, it also allows me to do more volunteering, which is something I'm passionate about, and particularly through my foundation work, and be a mentor to a number of young women within Cornell's industry, many of whom sounded just like me when I was graduating, right? They wanted to pay their student loans. They were trying to find the job that paid the most, but it was kind of one of those things of, what do I do after that? Because I'm not sure if what I'm going to major in is even going to exist in a few years. And I think that's the fascinating piece to me, is to have those conversations now with younger women and to both see myself, but also feel a little bit older and wiser.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as you think back on your time in your career, who are the people that mentored you? Who are, there's definitely a feeling, I think, with younger people, men and women, that post-pandemic, they're not getting the same kind of mentorship that they were in previous times. And so as you were growing up, are there a couple people that you can think of that impacted you, and can you elaborate?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I have to say, one of the biggest mentors I've ever had, and someone who is still a mentor to me today in so many ways, as well as just a dear friend, is a young man whose name is Boret and Bong Boret. So he's actually in Cambodia. He was one of the people that were on my team and actually helped to build and grow and lead out our entire new microfinance operation. He not only taught me Khmer, but he taught me to slow down, to think about the ways that I was going to interact with communities and learn with people and grow and provide opportunities. And to this day, I still check in. How is the rice yield this year? What are the implications of climate change? And we have real conversations around what life looks like on the ground. It's amazing to just even within a span of a few years, right? We're talking a decade. And there are such tangible differences. So that kind of mentorship to me is deeply fulfilling because it's a shared connection, but also something that I'll never stop being able to learn about, quite frankly, from something that defined me so much. And I think that's my best example of someone who I just truly love and keep in touch with today.
Yeah, I love that example because, there's, from our perspective in the United States, oftentimes, we're looking above us and people that have excelled in their profession. But to have somebody from such a different perspective in a country to give us insights on something, maybe that blind spots that we may didn't even think we had is interesting.
Absolutely. The learning never stops, that's for sure. And I think as I'm constantly reminded, I need to get back to Cambodia sooner than later and make sure I go catch up with everyone. There's a lot of dear friends out there.
Does HP Foundation invest overseas and in some of those countries that you were in? And how is that playing out? Is that getting hardware to folks that don't have it? Connectivity in different countries that are struggling? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. There's quite a few where my past experience is cross paths, but I will say I think the best opportunity to really showcase this is through this flagship program that we have called the Digital Equity Accelerator. And the spirit of this is essentially think of it as a annual competition, if you will, where we basically will say there's 3 countries every year that come up. It rotates annually, and we say tell us how you're closing a digital divide. You have to be a nonprofit to apply. That's the criteria. And you have to be very clear. What is the digital divide in your country? How are you addressing it? And what do you need? And we're going to also make the pot sweeter by saying, tell us what you need and what you think you need from a hardware perspective, but also know that there's going to be a capacity building grant. And so again, this is where I have both HP Inc. and the foundation able to support one effort. And one of the countries we went to just last year was Malaysia. And what I loved about this was you had different solutions applying from the main city area in Kuala Lumpur, but you also had organizations applying from some of the outskirts and the islands and the areas that were further from the city. And what it gives you is this deep dive into even within a country, the digital divide can look so different, right? From a geography perspective, from the individuals being impacted. And we had people applying for educational solutions and the ways they wanted to break down barriers there. We had an organization that was doing the earlier detections of cancer and cancer screenings. And what does that mean? And they've just won an award actually from their Ministry of Health, which is amazing. And so I love to see when these local nonprofits come in and they say, here's what we need. But then we also pair that with a ton of different technical experts from HP who say, okay, have you ever thought of this type of product or this type of solution? They've maybe never heard of it. And all of a sudden now, a year later, they're not only using it, but they're scaling because of it. And to me, that's when that sweet magic happens is they've gotten what they need, but they also had new opportunities come in as well.
For audience members in other countries, when does this always happen at the same time of year? How do they apply and who do they reach out to?
It's varied. So I will say for the next 3 countries, we'll be probably deciding over the next month. And we're hopeful to go live and have a call for applications around the November timeline this year. So stay tuned. We also have a website that's just focused on the Digital Equity Accelerator that you can search for HP. And that will give you all the latest updates on how to get involved and how to apply.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I like to end the show with the same question for every guest. And the question is, when you think about the future of work and you think about the future of AI and all that is to come digitally, what are the 2 words that you would use to express that future? And then you can elaborate.
I'm going to use an expression or a phrase, and I'm just going to say onwards, upwards. And why? Because we are constantly shown the power of technology, right, with intent. But I think I'm excited to see what the next frontier is going to be. I'm hearing it, I'm seeing it, I'm living it with these different nonprofits we work with, as well as the bigger community. Those are my 2 words.
Yeah, amazing. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to reach out or they just want to follow the work that you're doing?
I have an active LinkedIn that I check. I respond personally. It's my site, so happy for that. And also, I would definitely encourage people to please check out both the Digital Equity Accelerator page and also a completely free resource that we have for entrepreneurial business learning skills. There'll be an AI course coming soon called HP Life. It's part of our foundation. It's in 8+ languages. Please feel free
Nice.
to go and use it and reach out to us if you have any questions.
That's great. HP Life. Okay. Michele, thank you so much for being on. It's really fascinating to hear about the work that you're doing. And I'm excited about these opportunities all around the world and the impact that you're making. Would love to have you on again, and we can talk more about some of the future work that's going to be happening. So thank you again for being on the Shift AI podcast.
Thank you for such a great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Such a pleasure to have Michele Malejki as our guest on today's episode. Michele brings a unique perspective on how to drive digital equity and social impact through both business initiatives and philanthropic efforts. If you want to stay connected to Michele, you can find her on LinkedIn and X. And if you're interested in her insights on social impact and digital equity, definitely connect with her and keep up with her posts and activities online. I continue to be amazed by the guests we've had on the show, and I'm excited about the ones joining us in the near future. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for listening to this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the Shift AI podcast for more exciting interviews, and to the Augmented AI Weekly newsletter for updates on how AI can help you scale your business.